Welcome, folks, to Asians Represent. This is episode 56. I'm going to call it Honor Among Thieves for...
You already did.
For no particular reason.
You already did.
I'm going to call it Honor Among Thieves because that title is so fitting. We'll also do... I want to do a whole episode or a stream or something where we just watch the first 3 D&D movies and talk about that.
Yes.
Yeah.
I just downloaded it, and oh my gosh,
Totally legally.
I'm so excited for Jeremy. Totally legally.
I lived through them, so I still remember them.
So
very
we're
vividly.
going to do that.
I live
I
for
haven't
Jeremy.
seen any.
I live for Jeremy. I love that Jeremy Irons is in it. I love that even though he's only doing it because he needs to pay off a castle. Literally, that's why he did it.
You know, that's a good reason to do things.
He gives it his all.
That's the thing, like, what's more poetic than paying off your castle by being part of a Dungeons and Dragons movie?
That's just
Like, that's living the dream.
That's just like...
my only,
Except for the
I'm
part
so
where they
sad.
need to be good.
I guess the only sad thing
That's
is that
optional.
I'm just sad that either that, you know, that he didn't buy 2 more castles so he could appear in the subsequent movies.
well, he could, if he buys another castle, then he can rent out the other one to D&D in a castle, and then so therefore he can actually pay it off.
Oh my
That's
God,
like
can
just
you
like
imagine?
peak rich white dude. Oh, I need to pay off my castle, so I guess I'll star in a movie.
It's also
I mean, that's
what
like
I call the
Richard Garriott
Nicholas.
with Ultima games. Like,
I mean,
that
it's
man
also
keeps
like-
building castles.
It's also like a Nicolas Cage problem, right? Like he just keeps buying things he doesn't.
Well, and it's so weird because like there's actual
true.
castles in the United States, and like when I had to write when I was doing a Call of Cthulhu game, I researched it and I found out there were castles in New Orleans, and I was like, who puts a castle in New Orleans?
Rich
It's a
people.
swamp.
It's like
Rich
below.
people.
It's like below sea level.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
just-
no, it's a little it's close to Baton Rouge, so technically it's only a few feet below sea level.
And that castle burned down, fell over, and then it was swamp.
I mean, that in and of itself is a really cool prompt for like the castle that just like won't stand up. And there's a curse or something. Hey, there's a story for you right there. But that's it. We're not actually going to be talking about Nicolas Cage. We're not going to do a Nicolas Cage podcast. I mean,
This time.
if Nicolas Cage decides to like star in like some sort of like, if they do like a Last Samurai 2 with Nicolas Cage,
Look. If we had the money,
then we'll talk
Nicolas
about
Cage
it.
would appear on this podcast. Like
Daniel invoking this and doing like 2d6 psychic damage to everybody.
I'm just like, you know, I'm reaching out to the universe, but we are going to be talking about Kara-Tur. This is going to be the final episode of our series where we talk about the Kara-Tur campaign setting. I'm sure Kara-Tur, you know what? I keep saying final, but I'm like, something's going to happen and we're going to be drawn back into it. But this is the final episode where we talk about the book and our experiences reading the Kara-Tur campaign setting. Before we dive into it, we have some news. Some good news and some bad news. For the bad news, it has, if you follow me on social media, it has been kind of a rough couple of weeks for me. We have sadly lost Marla, our beautiful chubby cat. Marla had been she had been unwell for a couple of weeks, and we kind of made the really difficult decision of saying goodbye to Marla. She had many good like days with us. Her last couple of days with us were really sweet. She watched her favorite movies. I kid you not, John Wick, the John Wick series, Marla absolutely loves. She was super like uncomfortable for the past like few weeks. She was like scared. She wasn't going to litter box. It was awful for her. But when we played John Wick, she just sat in front of the TV and just watched it and then fell asleep watching John Wick.
Baby.
It's her favorite movie series. So we watched the John Wick 1, we watched John Wick 2. We didn't get to 3, but my parents came over. My dad actually got to hold Marla for the first time ever on her like second last day with us. So it was super sweet. Lots of memories, lots of crying. I took a lot of time off work, and the company I work for was really great. They sent us like flowers and everything, and no questions. They were like, just take all the time you need. So yeah, it's been tough. This is actually the first time I have ever podcasted without Marla. And I have been podcasting since 2016. So I want to make sure that this is a good episode and that we honor Marla.
To Marla.
So to Marla.
To Marla.
Marla was a wonderful cat, and she will live on in my memory for forever. Marla was great. We are comforted in knowing that we took really good care of her. We got blood work done last week, and she did not have diabetes. Her blood work and her urine work were perfect despite her weight. Marla, we were really unsure about her age, but like Marla was like almost 20 years old, and weighed about that much in pounds.
A pound for every year.
A pound for every year.
She carries her years.
She carries her years, and we always joke that, like, I would always joke and be like, oh yeah, Marla's Asian like her dad, and she's just gonna be young forever, and then all of a sudden be old, and that kind of came true. But we did some like looking back at things, and the old white lady that fostered Marla, that I adopted her from, kept a blog, like a blogspot blog. And I found all of these old posts that I had never seen about Marla, talking about how Marla, first of all, was a stray. I didn't know Marla was brought in from the streets. And when I told my dad was like, how did Marla survive on the streets like that? And I was like, I don't know. She's tough, I guess. But Marla came in from the streets and was like apparently one of the hardest cats to foster for this person. And after 2 months, like I got her, and it was just like a complete turnaround. So I am very comforted in knowing that Marla lived a really good life. So yeah, it's gonna be tough that, you know, Marla won't be here for any more Asians Represent, or just be here in my life. But I am comforted in being in this call with you four, because I was going to say we could talk about something cool. We're talking about Kara-Tur.
That's what you think.
We're talking about Kara-Tur.
We are capable of doing that, but you decided to do. We decided to do a show on Kara-Tur, so I mean, that's kind of the grief we did for ourselves.
Yeah, I did that, but like, you know, we had a great last few days with Marla, and yeah, so that's the bad news. The good news is that while we've had time off for me to kind of, you know, take care of Marla and do all of that stuff, I've been able to do some like really neat work, sort of like connecting with my family and making sort of short form content. And I've kind of been just doing this thing where, as an experiment, I just post on TikTok. And I've been posting on TikTok like every day for the past couple of weeks. And it's been really fun. I've just been talking about manga because I really love manga. And I've gotten... We can go on about this later. I mean, all the trash manga that I read. But one of the things that's really been positive for me is that I've been thinking about a lot more short form content for Asians Represent. I've kind of alluded to this more. But what I want to do is actually start talking about things that aren't necessarily fantasy. I want to start talking more about like contemporary issues that relate to our experiences in the games industry. So we talk about the model minority myth a lot, but I want to do short form content about that. I also want to do short form content kind of about our stories growing up and how that impacts our work. And so what we're actually going to be doing now is we're kind of committed to this, is our Bubble Tea Book Club we're going to have a new title for it. I'm really bad at titles. We have Dungeons and Asians. So really bad at titles, but we're going to actually turn Bubble Tea Book Club into more of a conversation about how we've grown up, how our culture has influenced our work, specifically our world building. So once a month, I actually want to do a conversation with folks who aren't necessarily even publishing. This could be folks who are actually in the Asians Represent Discord server. But I want to do one episode a month where we just talk about world building and stories from our lives and how they relate to, you know, the stories we tell at the table. Because I actually found this really neat object, and I'll get it later, but my partner came up to me and was like, "Hey, Daniel, when we were cleaning up my grandparents' house, do you want this?" And I was like, "What is it?" And it was like one of those metal hand warmers. I don't know if you folks have ever seen those. And I was like, "Why would I want that?" And my dad's like, "Oh, that's mine. I brought that with me from China when I was 11." And I was like, "What?" And it turns out that this hand warmer that I have, I wish I could call Sarah to get her to grab it. But this hand warmer that I have essentially came to Canada with my dad, and the bedroom that my dad slept in at my grandparents' house when he was a kid was actually not heated. And it was this like sort of vestibule area between the backyard and the main house. And my dad slept in a room that was basically the size of his bed. And oh, thank you, Sarah. And so he had this like hand warmer, and inside is the hand warmer. And my dad would literally hold this at night to keep warm because his room wasn't heated. And then my dad said, "That's why I don't feel cold," in the most like Asian way possible. And so I want to talk about, so on the positive side, I want to talk about these stories. I want to talk about stories of like our parents and, you know, how they influence the stories that we tell. And I want to use Bubble Tea Book Club for that. Because as we'll talk about during this episode, it's actually really difficult and sometimes kind of tedious to produce content where you're just reading things. And so that's what I kind of want to do. And that's kind of the revelation that I had with, you know, dealing with sort of the Marla stuff and cleaning up my grandparents' house. So yeah, that's kind of it for Asians Represent updates. We had to say goodbye to Marla, but we're going to try to tell more grounded stories, and this sort of work will actually allow us to feature more people. Folks who may not actually have published anything, or folks who I get so many DMs saying, "Hey, can I come on Asians Represent? I'm on this actual play." And I'm like, "Okay, what do you want to talk about?" And the content that we do now doesn't really support that, because Asians Represent used to be, "Oh, let's come on and we'll talk about your product and stuff." And it's not really that anymore, because we decided that we would have more impact by talking about really, really tough topics. Like, honestly, like this episode, or the last episode where we did, where we talked about making your own Asian-inspired campaign settings, or the season finale of last season where we had Sonia and Navarre on, and we literally talked about tension between the Black and Asian communities and how they can sort of unite. And so the content that we've made, while it has been far more impactful, hasn't allowed us to feature as many voices because of the highly, highly educational nature of them. And so transforming Bubble Tea Book Club into something different will allow us to do that. So yeah, that's the positive. Now, that said, to the negatives, let's talk about Kara-Tur. Let's talk about Kara-Tur.
Oh, good Lord.
Coming back around.
Coming back around, master of the segue. We have spent collectively a significant amount of time reading through the Kara-Tur campaign setting. If you go to our YouTube channel, there is an unfinished series called Asians Read Kara-Tur. And what we did once a month was we sat down and we fucking read the Kara-Tur campaign setting. And
We didn't get through very much of it.
We didn't get through very much of it. We tried so hard.
Enough. I'm gonna say we got through enough.
Yes,
We
and
got
that
By the end of it, it was a lot of it was like, oh, it's this particular kind of racism again. Oh,
Yeah.
they wrote this badly again because this book was not well written.
Yeah, I think as Liana said, we just kept running into the same themes of problems over and over again. It was a lot like being in like a, I don't know, just like a bad restaurant where it's like, and this doesn't have any salt in it, and this also has no salt, and this is mushy, and has no texture. So it was just sort of a lot of repeating. It was still new content. Like we weren't going back and redoing anything, but we were seeing these same issues come up and up again and again. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're like, I'm not a betting person, but I feel comfortable putting money on the idea that we're going to, if we were to continue, we would see these themes come back up again.
Yeah, and that was exactly
I did
it.
skip the rest of it.
Oh, Emma. Oh, bless. Bless.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so there was just so much repetition with Kara-Tur, not in the content itself, but in our reactions to the content. It was like, oh, it's this kind of racism. Oh, it's these stereotypes. Oh, this just sucks. And so we were kind of like, let's hold off on that because honestly, bandwidth-wise, that's like 2.5 hours that we could spend doing something a little bit more productive than basically rehashing our same reactions. So now we're here, and it's time to kind of do a post-mortem on Kara-Tur. Our overall thoughts. We talked about why we didn't finish reading it because it wasn't honestly worth reading everything. That's the answer right there. It just isn't worth reading Kara-Tur. And we're going to talk about why this episode, but we're also going to talk about the age-old question that everyone on Asians Represent gets asked, and it's, do you think WotC should just revive Kara-Tur? We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about why we don't think that's a good idea. We're going to talk about why some people might like that. And then we're going to talk about the challenges of actually trying to execute on that vision and that idea. Because some folks will often say, oh, you know what? You could just revise Kara-Tur. You'll make it better. We'll just get an all-Asian team. And then they'll bring back Kara-Tur, and Kara-Tur will be perfect. And the answer in my mind is like, that's a lot of work. And not the best kind of work.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about that. But I'd love to start with just our overall thoughts on Kara-Tur from reading it. I'm going to start... we're going to go in terms of the Twitch overlay. We're going to start with you, Liana. I want to ask you, what were your overall thoughts on Kara-Tur? My only positive thing from Kara-Tur is that stream we did, the comedy stream about Kara-Tur. That's the old that Michelle
Oh,
Gia.
yeah, with the
Yeah.
dormant parts. Yeah.
That was
that was great.
That was a
That was
positive. But I want to know, Liana, your thoughts on Kara-Tur. Like, if you were to basically put out a tweet, you had 240 characters to say why you liked or didn't like Kara-Tur, what would they be? And I know I'm putting you on the spot here.
Kara-Tur executes disgusting stereotypes in the most banal and uninteresting way I could possibly imagine.
Damn.
I will retweet that every day
Damn.
for the rest of my life.
Liana just
Damn, it's just
dropped the
like,
mic.
boom. I was like, 240 characters, and you're like, I'll do it in less than 100. So,
And then what gift
I'm
would
a
you add?
journalist by training, so this is something I'm supposed to be able to do.
So we've got basically the main point there is uninteresting stereotypes. Is a mishmash of stereotypes. Would you say that's a correct reduction of your reduction?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Now, Jackie, we've got that. What about you? 240 characters. See if you could beat Liana's 3 words.
Man,
But-
that man, just going like that out of the gate, man. That is that's gonna be a strong one.
Yeah. Oof.
That was some excellent fire. I love it. I think the best way to put it is Kara-Tur felt like as if somebody literally just took a menu off of a Chinese takeout. And
I mean, it
and
looked
wrote
like
an
it
RPG
visually.
out
It looked like it
of it.
visually.
Yeah, visually it also
remember
looked
the-
like that.
The
Do you
Chinese
remember
the gibberish.
alphabets?
Yep. Yeah, the literal
Oh.
gibberish. Because
Oh,
I
not
Alphabet.
the alphabet, that supplement that we did a whole episode
Oh
on.
yeah, that too. Even worse. And
I
their numbering
forgot.
system.
I forgot about that.
I'll never
I didn't forget. I didn't
never
forget. I just chose to acknowledge it didn't exist.
I completely forgot about that. Thank you, Jackie.
That's not forgetting. That's like your brain was attempting to
Yeah.
protect itself by jettisoning the memories.
That
So,
was a response. Yeah.
so Jackie, you would say that to add on to the uninteresting stereotypes, you would say that it's just lazy product design,
Yeah.
based off
Yeah.
of, again, these uninteresting stereotypes.
Yep. I mean, we had that issue of the most, especially when we saw the very inconsistent voice in the prose because it would fluctuate from third person to first person, or it would have a completely different tonal application. And you can tell that that's literally an editor just literally like it felt like somebody just took, all right, here's all your printed work. I'm going to cut and paste it into what would be the final manuscript, and we're just going to print this through a printer, and we're just or a copier, and that's what we're going to do. And that's how it felt.
100%. It was it's just an odd thing because never before have I seen a TTRPG product felt so disjointed. You can usually when you read a book, you can tell, like, there's a team, but everything is connected. In Kara-Tur, you can really tell that different people worked on it. And there wasn't a unifying voice, even though they set narratively a unifying voice at the beginning of the book.
Bad one, but they did.
A bad one, but they tried.
The dragon that lives inside the palace that likes to boop everywhere. Like, I don't.
Yeah, and it's the dragon writing about Kara-Tur to a white dude.
Yeah.
But the dragon's narrative.
We'll be talking about Elminster a bit later.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. But it's meta on so many different levels because it's a white dude pretending to be an Asian Asian creature, Asian character. So it's a white person pretending to be an Asian character, writing about a fake Asian culture written by white people for a fake white character.
I feel like this is just a racism tiramisu.
There we go.
That's a good one.
There we go. It's a 7-layer.
That's
it's
Michelle's
a 7
sweet right there.
It's a 7-layer dip of the caucasity. But yeah,
I like that one. That was really good.
That's what it was. That's exactly because the tone was so weird. So then, how about you, Emma? What was your take? Because you read ahead.
Yeah, because I wanted to see the Japan parts, which I actually haven't looked at because I read the Northern Wastelands and went, oh, good Lord. Because a lot of that is stereotypes about Northern Asia as a whole, but a lot of stuff about the Ainu in particular. So I started a document where I was breaking it down and doing essentially a free consult on it, but I haven't gotten back to it in a while. And I haven't looked at either of the two Japans, the two feudal Japans that they have there for some reason.
Yeah, two feudal Japans, and then one of them
What's better
has
than
like
one feudal Japan? Two
Two
Japans.
of them. What's the difference? Who knows? But
There's one diet and one regular.
Yeah, I don't even know.
Oh, I hate that so much.
Like they couldn't even draw from like different period inspirations.
Yeah,
and have them coexist and do interesting things with it, because that would have taken effort and good writing.
Yeah, we'll get into that though. We'll get into that.
I would say my summary was it was just silly, and I think that's something we determined fairly early on. Where it's just like, I don't even know if I'm mad right now because this is just ridiculous. Like, I'm laughing at it.
Yeah, it's laughably
the snake table.
Yeah, the snake thing, or like the concentric rings.
And like honestly, we kind of made it sillier because what are you gonna do with?
What are you gonna do?
But like I would say it wasn't compelling fantasy because of those silly things that indicated real world stereotypes and racism, and it just became absurd. Like, you can't concentrate on this world that's supposed to be another place when you're reading stuff like there's a beer producing town called Tsingtao, you know? What is that? Oh, you went to a restaurant once and had a Tsingtao? Okay, cool. Now there's a town named after it.
Yeah, I forgot that there was even that.
I remember so much.
I remember that very well.
the horse wrestling.
The horse wrestling. That one, I remember that one.
We never did the jersey.
We never did the jersey.
But like, I still love the roll for snakes.
Yeah, the roll for snakes was always a great one.
Roll for snakes doesn't sound Asian, because you'd be like, oh yeah, you could put a temple with snakes, you just roll for snakes, you could stick that literally anywhere. Honestly, you know where that would actually be compelling and scary?
Ireland. Okay, well,
I was gonna say I was gonna say Australia, because
there's some problems with the Ireland one. I was going to say Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
Why's it gotta be snakes?
Yeah, why's it gotta be snakes?
Why does it gotta be snakes?
Yeah, it's just silly and not compelling because it's just like you're taken out of the fantasy by the real world stereotypes. That's what you're saying, right, Emma?
More or less, and like the way that it's used and all of that, it's like, oh, okay.
I see what you did there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so then what about you, Michelle? I don't know if there's anything to add on to this. Was there anything else that you were like, this is my tweet about Kara-Tur?
You said that
you said that the racism tiramisu.
And let me roll for snake real quick. Hold for snake.
Hold for snake, please.
Are we holding priority as well? Are we holding priority as well?
Hold priority.
Oh.
Okay, that's 6 snake tokens. Sell his death touch. Okay.
Oh my God.
So it was. I mean, I am always going to be grateful for Kara-Tur because in its own way, it allowed me to connect with this community that has been so supportive. I've met all of you and you're amazing people, and I'm so better and happier and more enriched to have you in my life.
Well, that's the best answer right there.
So there is that silver lining to this utter cluster quilt fucktastrophe that is Kara-Tur. But if I were to draw upon my speech and debate days, I would basically try to boil down my experience of Kara-Tur into 3 points. The thesis being, this was a very silly, frustrating, absurd experience. First, it was just, it was surreal to see the stereotypes that I had always grown up with and had lived suddenly codified in words on a page in a book that was published. So there was that with the real like the subtext filming becoming text. That was a very strange experience, and I guess it was also that was really strange for me. The second thing is also just the frustration I think I felt. I think that may have been the chief emotion that I had during this whole read through, because there's a lot of wasted potential. There's a lot of it's lazy is essentially what it is. And that's one of the reasons why I always feel very skeptical and cynical towards anyone who praises this work. Because through any objective means, this is a poorly constructed thing. Not just within the patchworks of voices we see, but even within those sections we see very disjointed ideas of what this person is trying to communicate, which suggests a host of things, such as like poor editors and like bad teamwork and all this really bad research. And I think at the end, the last point I would make is that it definitely brings a lot of historical context to Asian representation within the TTRPG and fantasy worlds. Genre fiction has taken a lot of leaps and bounds within the past decade or so. I mean, that's why we've had Gamergate and has such and Hugo nominations and whatnot. We've had a lot of pushbacks against that within genre fiction and related areas. So understanding the full historical context of where this is coming from, I think gives us better perspective on where we need to push this in the future. I'm sure we're going to get to that later on in this podcast. But it's interesting to see where the bar is set. Granted, it's at sub-basement level, but I think is at the end of the day a very interesting teaching point. And would I say it's like quote unquote required reading, or at least like a cultural touchstone in order to understand where we've got to not be? I'm not certain I can make that conclusion, but I think it was marginally useful within that context.
I would honestly say that if I were to pick, if we're looking at, I was actually talking to another member of our Asians Represent community about doing like a show, and looking at the sort of the evolution of like, Asian sort of like themed media. And one thing that I've been thinking about when you brought up this point about, is this a cultural sort of touchstone in the evolution of Asian representation in tabletop games or in games in general? And I would honestly say Kara-Tur wouldn't be the one I would pick. I would honestly pick Oriental Adventures as sort of like a, hey, this is sort of peak Asian stereotypes codified on a page, like you said. Because that one was just, you could tell that they really tried harder on Oriental Adventures than they did with Kara-Tur, and they still failed. And so I think the underlying message of sort of Orientalism and racism are better codified in Oriental Adventures than it is in Kara-Tur, because it's just absurd. It's just silly. It's poorly executed. It's just bad on so many different levels.
I mean, we got to play in a village called Wakan, where I made you all roll to see whether or not
you could see Wa. It's literally like
roll perception.
It's literally like it's in Ontario. It's just like going to Windsor and rolling to see if you see Detroit. It's like, well, what is this? Why? Right? But yeah, it's like, it's just bad because it's lazy, it's uninteresting, it's poorly executed as a product, and it's just bad fantasy because of those stereotypes, like you mentioned. Now, that said, we get a lot of questions saying, well, you should bring back Kara-Tur. Do you think it should be brought back? And the answer for me is always no, for many reasons. And I'd actually like to talk about that. Now, one thing to sort of preface this with, because I know that there are going to be people who are going to bring this up. Ed Greenwood himself, the creator of the Forgotten Realms, was not a fan of Kara-Tur. In a tweet on March 22nd, and thank you, Jeremy, for sharing this with us, because I had never seen this. On March 22nd, 2021, somebody asked Ed, hey, I'm interested to hear your thoughts about Kara-Tur. I have been working on an East Asian-based setting, but I realized you had one. Any new development on it? And Ed said, Kara-Tur isn't mine. It was developed by TSR staff designers and grafted onto the realms. On my own, I would have never included any so close to real analogs into the realms. Thay was as close as I went to any flavor of Eastern warm environments. And then another person came in and said, so what you're saying is that your version of Thay, there's samurai and ninja or equivalents? And then Ed said, no, that's not what I'm saying. Samurai and ninjas are real world historical, though Hollywood has messed with them a lot. I was speaking of not doing real world analogs. Thay has assassins working with the government, nobles, and anyone wealthy enough to hire them. And then the same person said, well, your personal Faerun has Celtic influence, for example. Is there no region in the original realms that has influence of other culture myths? Also, if Toril has a tie to Earth, why wouldn't there be some analogous parts? And then Ed said, many places in the realms have been influenced by real-world historical cultures thanks to all the gates/portals between Earth and the realms, now disused, hence the forgotten part of the name. But that's a very far cry from direct real-world analogs. And I wish that I had found these tweets earlier. Like, they have like 2 likes, 3 likes, 4 likes on them. And I just read them all word for word. Now, I have like a interesting like personal connection to Ed Greenwood. We used to sit on the same panel at a con every year. So I used to see Ed once a year. He actually lives in Canada, and he actually lives in the same province as Emma and I. He doesn't live too far from Toronto, actually. And while he has done like lots of stuff that's not great, to hear even Ed say, I didn't want to do Kara-Tur because I didn't want to just take Asia and try to make it fantasy. And that's one of the things that like we talk about a lot on this podcast. It's the fact that if you're going to try, we read all of the L5R core rulebook. If you're going to try to take a real world culture and historical period and make it fantasy, you have to do a lot of work. You have to do a lot of work. And if you were to revive Kara-Tur, you have the challenge of basically saying, well, how much of Kara-Tur are we going to revive? Right? And unfortunately, there are a lot of problems with Kara-Tur because of its effects on D&D right now. So on one end, Wizards of the Coast could basically say, hey, we're not doing Kara-Tur at all. But the problem is that they actually mentioned Kara-Tur in the Dungeon Master's Guide and the Player's Handbook. In the Dungeon Master's Guide, there's specifically a section that talks about an optional honor system and how it would fit perfect in an Asian-inspired Kara-Tur setting, right? So they've mentioned it. When I was working on Candlekeep Mysteries and I wanted to make the Order of the Immortal Lotus, I had actually written, I was like, well, I want to make them Asian, so I'm kind of stuck. I have to use Kara-Tur because there's nowhere else. And so it kind of binds you to any future updates. So I could see on one end why folks would want to revive it because it's mentioned in the current edition of D&D and that there isn't an Asian sort of setting. And if you want more Asian stories, do you have to create a whole new thing or Kara-Tur? It's a really tough conundrum, and I'd love for us to, we don't have to go in order, but discuss sort of the challenges of reviving it, why folks might want to, and why you shouldn't. For me, it's really like people would want to revive Kara-Tur because it's already mentioned in the current D&D lore. And so people want that frame of reference. And often positive intent, I'm projecting that, folks who ask about reviving Kara-Tur are often those who might see it in a current 5th edition product, like a mainline 5th edition product, and want to use that, right? I understand that if you went and played the Book of Inner Alchemy, it says that Bak Mei is a Shou person from Shou Lung. Well, what if I want to do his origin? I need Kara-Tur for that, right? Or do I? So I understand why folks would want it. On the other hand, though, Kara-Tur is, like we've said, just so objectively bad that any revival might just be in name only. But if you were doing it in name only, there are still going to be challenges with it that we're going to talk about. So I'm going to put it to the rest of you because I've just been ranting about this because clearly this has been on my mind. What are your thoughts on why people would want it revived and why it shouldn't be revived? Rant over. Go ahead, Michelle.
Okay,
hand up.
Like a good type A Asian student. So, I mean, this is. So I guess I'll start with the obvious, like, not really great reason, in my opinion, why people would want to have this setting return. And I think that sentiment was very vocally expressed in the reviews that we have seen for Journeys to the Radiant Citadel. There, I think, are people out there who feel that they are entitled to roleplay anyone they want, anywhere they want, in any setting, any place, without consequences and without, any thoughts, because hashtag freedom. And so I think that those folks would be very interested in seeing probably some kind of revamp in the ways that we've seen other places be revamped in other properties within the coast and elsewhere. I don't think, obviously, that's a great idea, mostly because there are real world considerations to, consider. But I think there's also another reason why folks would want to see a return, and it's because they have this idea that we could do it better. I think the biggest, most recent instance of returning to an Asian inspired setting, but like making it different has been Magic the Gathering's return to Kamigawa, now known as Neon Dynasty Kamigawa, which we have discussed extensively in other episodes of Asians Represent.
And to be clear, that is an Evangelion reference, right? Like that's where they're going with that.
There's a lot of different references going on.
A lot of
different,
but even with Kamigawa, we talked about how the legacy of the original Kamigawa inherently holds it back, and the flaws with even that project.
Precisely. And so that is one of the things that is so difficult, and I think almost to a worse extent. Like I am familiar with old school Kamigawa lore, and there were definitely a lot of mistakes that were made. But this is again was discussed in previous episodes. However, I think that the body of work we see with Kara-Tur is so inherently flawed that once we gut it for anything, is there really much left to build upon at that point? At this point, does it make even more sense to just toss the whole thing out and start over from scratch? But even then, like you mentioned, Daniel, like we are still shackled, we are still anchored to the legacy of what has and had come before. And so would I say, like, according to the infinite probabilities and mysteries of the universe, anything is possible. I'm not saying it's impossible. However, I would recommend against it because it's just not worth it. It's not worth the time. It's not worth the effort. Why might as well just throw it out the window and start with something new if you want to go in that direction. Frankly, you know, there are a lot of things that we could spend time on that might be more productive than creating an all Asian setting like that. And to the same extent, I mean, I again am also expressing my personal bias and nervousness here, but I just think that if you're going to be building a new house, you got to make sure the foundation's actually solid and you're not, you know, trying to construct something on quicksand, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that you're mentioning is
or a swamp.
Or a swamp. It's like, yeah, you're getting that brand recognition from Kara-Tur, right? People know the name, even the legacy folks. Those who play 5th edition currently will recognize the name Kara-Tur if they're super into the lore. I'm honestly curious to see if it'll come up in the D&D movie next year. But yeah, it's that question you brought up again is like, if you're going to bring it back, is it only going to be in name only? Like, because you have this legacy that you have to deal with. If you bring it back, it has to be called Kara-Tur. The certain people in it will have to be called show people. You have to identify like what you're going to keep. And more often than not, what you're going to have to keep is ultimately going to be harmful. Because some things that are recognizable also maybe happen to be the most harmful things. Like, if we're going to bring back Oriental Adventures, are we going to have to codify the honor system? Because folks are going to want that. If we're going to bring back Kara-Tur, are we going to have to keep samurai because people remember that? Are we going to have to keep the kung fu sort of stuff in there because people will recognize that? But that, again, will force, say, ideally, an all-Asian team to work with those things. Mm-hmm. That's the problem, right? What about the rest of you folks?
Is it my turn? Is it time?
We could go. You can go if your turn. Michelle set the standard of like raise hand.
Okay.
I don't know.
I just find it useful.
Yeah, it is. No, I agree.
I've been thinking about this a fair bit since we started planning for this episode. So I'm going to talk about why I personally believe it is a poor business case, and why I also likewise believe that it is an inevitability that it will happen at some point. We're gonna have a lot of fun today.
Welcome.
Okay, let's do it.
Did you read my TED Talk? Here's my powerful presentation. This is business, Liana.
And it's
Love
just
it.
like you just have like a meme.
I am
and
a
it's just,
businesswoman first and foremost.
and it's just like that Thanos. It's like I am inevitable. And it's just Kara-Tur. God. Go ahead. Go. Sorry. Go ahead, Liana.
Okay,
go
I'm
ahead.
gonna make this prior presentation. That is the slide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so against it, the official sales numbers and sales figures for Kara-Tur have not been released. I did do some digging. I could not find it. However, there are a number of context clues that lead us to believe that Kara-Tur as a setting was very poorly received. And I believe the first being the quality of the book, or lack thereof, clearly shows a lack of confidence in the product. I grew up reading Dragonlance, for example, and they were written around the same time, and they absolutely have their own problems. But in terms of writing quality and editorial process, they are miles ahead of what was presented in Kara-Tur. Also, the last official Kara-Tur product came out in 1990, and that brand was killed. That clearly suggests to me that as a brand, Kara-Tur was not strong and was not popular. The Oriental Adventures do seem to have done better, since you see that more. And I noticed Steve pointed out in the D&D Discord that it's commonly requested. But Kara-Tur as a setting doesn't really... Yeah, exactly. Kara-Tur as a setting doesn't really seem to have a fandom. I went onto the D&D Next or whatever, their website where they have all the books, and you can use their system but always pay them royalties. You know, that fun arrangement.
D&D DM's
I looked up Kara-Tur. DM's Guild, that's the one. Thank you. I think D&D Next was the fourth edition one that died horribly. Back when I still kind of enjoyed D&D. Anyway, off topic, but the DM's Guild has Kara-Tur up. We've talked about it. They added their little disclaimer about the cultural notes. I'm gonna just applaud Daniel here for his effort and helping make that happen. And it has 17 reviews. It rates like 4.5 out of 5 stars or something like that. So the people who review it obviously really like it. I checked Greyhawk, and the running joke that I have always heard in the D&D community since I started in 3.5 is Greyhawk. That's the joke. It's Greyhawk. Who cares about Greyhawk? Absolutely nobody. It's the official setting. No one gives a shit. And Greyhawk at least managed to get 65 user reviews, also generally rated that highly. So, even from that basic context clue, I don't think a lot of people are actually clamoring for Kara-Tur. It's just that the ones who are loud and will latch on to, say, any, I don't know, Asian-run podcast that talks about these matters and scream at us ad nauseum with hundreds of burners and the side of horrid racism that we're also so blessed to receive constantly. So that's why I don't think they should happen. Now, here's why I think it will eventually happen anyway. Because they continue to use it and include it within the branding of Dungeons and Dragons, because it is mentioned in the DM's Guild. And I'm very sorry to inform you of this, Daniel, but because you perpetuated that in the Book of Inner Alchemy.
It's true. It's true. I'm a part of the problem.
That's what Twitter says, at least.
The existence of Kara-Tur in the Forgotten Realms is, in my eyes, an inevitability that they're going to receive enough requests to at least entertain the notion of reviving it. I think we were talking kind of privately earlier. Oh, that's my cat. She might start crying, so I might have to let her out in a second. But we were talking earlier about how Rokugan was really, and Rokugan has problems. It has a lot of problems, but it was really the most successful iteration of D&D Asia, however you quantify that. It is also notable that L5R, the card game, has failed at least twice and has been sold to 2 different companies. And I played the card game. I live in Seattle. I played the card game while Wizards of the Coast, Seattle-based company, Renton, but only a Seattleites actually care about that. But while Wizards of the Coast owned L5R, I was playing it. I had to drive an hour north to where I actually live now, actually funny, to get into tournaments because no one in Seattle played the damn card game. That's not a great financial forecast for these settings in general, but there's enough of a loud kind of cult appeal fan base of kind of the Gestalt concept of D&D Asia that I think inevitably some exec's going to be like, we got to give the people what they want. What worries me is that because the numbers... Oh, Scout.
Scout agrees.
It's Scout agrees, absolutely. But my concern is because the numbers have, by all accounts, suggested a typical underperformance of this brand, it's gonna get bargain bin like editorial oversight again, and it's going to continue to be very bad because they think they need to make it because it's going to sell to some people who are constantly demanding it, but they're not going to want to invest heavily into it because no one buys it outside of these people who won't shut up about it.
And they're the people who just want to see the same thing over again. So just go get the old one.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and
they
then
want
there are
the
people
old guard.
who are just interested to see what will be done with it. But that's
Yeah,
not
absolutely.
That's not someone who's going to buy and play and enjoy it and promote it. That's just like intrigue.
Yeah.
But the same people who
It's the
also
same-
like
yeah.
the same people who also want it for like out of curiosity or like, hey, I want to do an Asian thing, are also like, one thing that folks do is that they never say, you know what, I'm gonna go look and see if somebody has self-published another setting or self-published a ton of work. It's not like there's a whole Unbreakable that does all this stuff. It's not like there are so many other micro settings on itch.io, Drive-Thru RPG. It's the fact that folks want a mainline game. Now
They want official.
they want
it to be
official. They want because
They want that weird stamp of approval.
It's because they want the wizard stamp and the Asian stamp. They want both stamps. When one of those stamps,
I don't know. I don't think too many of these people are concerned about the Asian stamp. They just want the wizard stamp.
just want the wizard
you
stamp.
would be so surprised to I get so many people who are asking me, oh, do you folks have an Asians Represent approved stamp that we can put on our product? Can we pay for that? There are so
Oh my
many
God.
folks who want that.
Oh no.
So many folks. I
Yeah.
can make so much
Oh,
money,
No.
but then cast aside my soul. Yeah,
That's what we call selling out.
that's what we call selling out.
Yeah, that's what we call selling
Yeah.
out.
That's what we call selling out. But
yeah.
there's people want that stamp, right? But they
Mhm.
want both of them when really one of them is more important than the other. And if you're listening to this podcast, you know which one's the important stamp. Now, Jackie, go ahead. And then we have a trend now. I like it.
I will add that I think I will add to the point of like the inevitability of Kara-Tur because if you haven't been keeping up, like everyone else has seen it, Spelljammer is now going to be an official thing for Wizards of the Coast, and that was like a meme that started out in like early on in like 5E's career, and now it's an actual real thing. So
Spelljammer's always been a meme, though.
It has always been a meme, but I will say like I have had the luxury of like reading other people who like done analysis of like they did a similar business analysis of like Spelljammer for when it was part of TSR, and it also was like a very low performing line. So actually, I think technically speaking, it might even been it was the lowest, second only to Dark Suns, but Dark Suns is a can of worms in itself.
I was gonna say, do you think Dark Sun?
They did do 4E
Dark Sun. Do you think Dark Sun?
That did happen.
Do you think they'll do Dark Sun before Kara-Tur? I think so, but there are problems with both. Dark Sun, oh my god.
I think so. Dark Suns is like highly problematic on many fronts, and it's just like the fact that so many people adamantly are like, I want Dark Suns to come back, and you're like, oh, you want Dark Suns to come back? Oh, okay, that's a choice.
What part of Dark?
Choice.
My question is always, what part of Dark Sun do you like? What part do you enjoy?
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, so it's the same issues of like the thing is like there's so much. So when you have people who are new to like the hobby who are coming in who are like, oh, I see this mentioned Kara-Tur, what is it? And it's like, then they look into it, it's like, oh, but how come there's nothing updated? And everyone else who's been around the longest time is like, it doesn't want an update. We don't want to give it.
It doesn't want
Because
one.
Yeah, and I mean, and
Let it rest.
let it rest. But the
Don't invoke those dark magics.
but the problem, and like Liana has pointed this out by like jokingly calling me out. The problem is it's a
people will
totally
start writing for it.
it's a totally
Yeah,
valid
absolutely.
point though. The thing
Yeah.
about Kara-Tur that makes it difficult and its inevitability more likely is the fact that it exists. You could sail to Kara-Tur. That's
Yeah.
a part of the problem.
I mean, there is a samurai subclass from Xanathar's Guide and everything.
Exactly. They have that stuff.
Yep.
And I think more people want Oriental Adventures because they want mechanical content. I don't think people care as
Yeah.
much about the setting. They want mechanical content. I think there
Yeah.
would definitely be a hunger for Asian themed one shots. But I think more people care about content, right? Like on when I did Candlekeep, do you know like the there are folks who are like, oh, I really like the story and all that. The most discussion I ever saw about this was like, the gloves of soul catching are OP. Like that's the one thing that I saw. Oh, this is the Holy Avenger for monks. Like more people care about the mechanical options because
Yeah.
I would say that there are a lot of people who are just doing their own homebrew and they're just looking for things
Yeah.
that they could port in.
Yeah.
And so an entire campaign
Yeah.
setting is less useful than, hey, I have these subclasses, I have these new class options, I have these new weapons, I have stuff that I could use on D&D Beyond, right? That's what I think people want. But if you're like me
yeah.
and you get hired by WotC, and this is before you decide to read Oriental Adventures Live, and you get hired by WotC, and you're like, oh my god, dream come true, I'm going to write something Asian. After previously they actually wanted a writing sample from me like a while ago, and it was really odd because I didn't know how this worked. And Mike Merles, when Mike Merles was doing D&D, reached out to me personally and asked for something. And I wrote something that I was like a cultural thing that I was really proud of. And I'm like, but they do that for a writing sample, so it'll never see the light of day. And I'm like, ah, damn, that was really good. But when I got the Candlekeep thing, I was like, I'm going to do something Asian because this is my one shot. And if I want to do something Asian and I want to make sure that people use what I write and there's a legacy to it, like a positive legacy, I still have to anchor it to what already exists in the most so subtle way as I possibly can. Because the original drafts of the Book of Inner Alchemy talk about Kara-Tur. There are multiple mentions of Kara-Tur in it. And then after I started reading Oriental Adventures, I was like, oh my God. And I actually messaged the editor, Hannah Rose, and I was like, please remove all mentions of Kara-Tur from it. Like I had that conversation with my editor, and thank goodness, like I had a fantastic editor. Shout out to Hannah Rose, MCDM, Arcadia Magazine. Shout out to them. But like I had that conversation, but in order to anchor my Asian content in the world, the compromise was that Bak Mei was a show human. And that was the thing that sort of anchored it to the official world. But for me,
and it's
challenging.
That's just it. Yeah, it's that requirement, and the fact that they continue to hold that requirement. Like,
well, it's
that
not.
right there
It's
is why
not.
We're
Well,
gonna
it's
see
not.
it again.
It's not a requirement. It's not like WotC was like, if you want it to be Asian, you have to do this. That's not what I was saying. What I was saying is that I want D&D fans who don't know who I am, who don't listen to Asians Represent, because we're small fries, right? I want folks to read my adventure, understand that it is Asian, but get something really positive out of it. Like when I was talking about chi and it being medical and not just being for combat. But in order for people to understand that it's Asian, aside from the name, because if you just look up Bak Mei, like it's a right? Mentioning that its show was a tactical choice on my part for folks to realize, oh, this is supposed to be Asian. And it's not like, oh, this is in another dimension. It's not like you open the book and you get sent to Asia. It's like, no, there are Asian people right there on the Sword Coast. And that's what I wanted. And in order to say that there are Asian people in the Sword Coast, you can't say, hey, Bakme is an Asian human, right? I had to say show. And so...
But that is what I mean. That is what I mean.
Oh,
though.
okay.
Even if WotC isn't directing that you do it,
the fact that it exists.
Because it exists, there is that inevitable pressure to utilize this, and you are intrinsically tied to it. And unless they do something that lets them clean break, which I don't honestly think they're going to do, because they've indicated in their books already that they are acknowledging Kara-Tur as an existent place that is the Asian place. That is going to persist until it reaches a point in which they are going to feel obligated to revive the setting.
But also it is one of those easy ways for them to be like, we're going to incorporate more representation. Let's use something we already have, but hire new people.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, let's use that as a segue into the challenges of revising Kara-Tur, right? So if you were to revise Kara-Tur, what would you do? The natural move would be like, let's get all of these amazing people. Let's get everyone who was on Asians Read Kara-Tur, and have them write this thing. There are still going to be challenges to that, right? Because ultimately, what would you need? You would need a project manager, a WotC project manager who's Asian, right? Because for Candlekeep Mysteries, for the people who worked on Book of Inner Alchemy, so Chris Perkins, Hannah Rose, myself, and the artist, guess who was the only Asian person? Me, right? So there's still the challenge of everybody above or beside you not being Asian. So even if you got a team of all Asian freelancers, you would need folks who are actually WotC employees to also be Asian, because you need advocates who are actually within that WotC system. At the same time, you also have to say, well, what is ultimately the, not brand, but cultural identity of Kara-Tur? Because if you look at Kara-Tur, it's like they've got, Kara-Tur is just Asia. So you have Southeast Asian influences, you have two Japans, you have like multiple Chinas, you have like Mongolia, you've got all these, you've got a Korea there, you've got a mishmash of everything. If you go forward with Kara-Tur, is the move to basically be like, okay, so we're going to get a diverse team of Asians and we're just going to throw them at Kara-Tur and say, let's revive it. But Emma, you're going to write the Japan stuff, but it's still got to have two Japans, right? Because we want to use the same map. So because, you know, there are already existing 5e maps, I guess.
Terrible map. Not worth it.
But that's the thing, though, right?
Remember the roads?
There are
God, the roads.
I just flashback to Liana being like, the logistics of Kara-Tur. But like that's the problem, right?
Be careful, they're gonna try and hire me for that now.
Oh,
you do a great job, though. You do a great job.
I would ensure that the training routes make sense.
It's gonna be like,
or I would kill someone.
The credits gonna be fantasy supply chain.
Yes.
Oh my god, I would 100% like.
But that's
like
a challenge,
a world
right?
building thing, though. That's like amazing. Okay, I guess my thought is like, we need to do this in installments.
Yes,
we need to do this in installment. One, we got to break this down because we're dealing with an entire continent in two Japans.
Yeah.
Wow. But like for example, if I were to try to like break this project down and prioritize things, we'd start with the capital, right? We'd start with the capital, we'd break it down, because that's where like everything should happen. I think that's an easy place to easily insert like a couple of one-off adventures, and just sort of like, okay, we're in Kara-Tur, but we are specifically focusing on, it's almost like a Ravnica thing, right? Where we're like, this is what.
Yeah.
Like we're going to talk
District
about the
10,
different districts. We're going to talk about like you know, the imperial family, if the imperial family is still around, and like what is their role, how have things changed, and I think trying to start with that small, just a nice bite, I think is one of the first ways to try to make this at all useful or successful, because one of the biggest problems with both Oriental Adventures and Kara-Tur is just like the world.
It's just because Kara-Tur is Asia, and you're like, and I would even take a further step back and be like, we're not going to do the capital, because it's like, first, like I said, is this Chinese? Is this Japanese?
Yeah.
Is like, are we going to do multiple books and it's going to be like a box set and you're going to have China, Japan, Korea, and like, and then ultimately they're going to take all of Southeast Asia and just put it into one book. That in and of itself is a massive problem, right?
Well, they did do
Yeah.
that already.
I am definitely remembering our earlier conversation about the jungle Asians.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
And
There are
so-
two Kara-Tur books. One is the islands, and
Correct.
one is the main
Yeah,
Right.
but it's like, if we, I guess I am just sort of, if we were to do this, we'd need to break it down.
Yeah,
We need to chunk it, like
a
just
place
chunk
to
it up.
start.
Yeah, so what
Yeah.
I would do this, and this is actually, I remember when Jackie, you folks first brought me on to Unbreakable. This was my pitch about Unbreakable.
Yeah.
What I would do if
I remember it.
if WotC hired me, this is what, and they were like, you're going to bring back Kara-Tur and we're going to do it in installments. This is what I would do. I would pick one important city, because you know how we have like Waterdeep, Baldur's Gate. I would find
Oh, yeah.
one fictional city. I'd even just brand new, doesn't even have to exist. It's just an Asian city, right? And all I would do is I would say, we're going to make a campaign setting and it's going to be confined to an entire city. And it would be called Adventures in Asian City Name, something like that, right? And then I would say, this city is going to be the Chinese city. All Chinese team to work on this, right? And then in the lore, you could basically flesh it out from there. You could do another book and it's Adventures in this fictional Japanese city, blah, blah, blah. And then these could be components of a larger world. And within that city, you could build this rich, internal, self-contained history. You could have your own like subclasses and all of that stuff. Because if you're looking at storytelling and you're looking at like big cities and this idea, look no further than Arcane on Netflix, right? You look at Arcane and you
Piltover.
look Piltover, exactly. And you just
Piltover and Zod.
make that. And you just do it and you just make it a fantasy Asia. And because you're doing it in a city, sure, you could say, if you want to keep the name of Kara-Tur, this is somewhere in Kara-Tur. This is a show city in Kara-Tur, but it's a brand new city, right? And you don't have to write about any external sort of connections, because the stories are being told in this one city. You could have an entire section that's just all urban adventures that take place in the city, right? You could have subclasses that are related to the inner workings of the city. You could have equipment that's all manufactured in the city. And I guarantee
Like
people
new
would buy that.
feats.
New feats and everything.
Yeah.
And I guarantee people would buy that. And I guarantee it'll be better than that League of Legends
I like the idea of just a
D&D thing
brand
that
new
they did.
city.
Right? A brand new
Yeah,
city.
I've always been a fan of the new city idea myself, because honestly, we've read through some of those cities and it's not great. And so,
What are you talking about? We create a whole rich new world for Wakan. There are fish everywhere.
so
Elder
I,
Tour, yeah.
I'm always bigger of a fan when it comes to like, if we're gonna revise something, make something new out of it, and lightly reference the things that need to be referenced, but don't have a huge attachment to it. Because the problem I've come to seeing a lot, not just in like Kara-Tur, but in other settings, because when they start revamping things, people start getting very attached to their nostalgia, and they become so they forget that like there needs to be some level of change for progress to make, because if these settings are supposed to be living settings where people live through them, then there should be changes and evolutions. And so when things change and not in the way they like it, they get like, even Kamigawa had the experience that Ravnica experienced that multiple different times. So it's like,
Do a time jump. Do a time jump.
yeah, like a time jump, like, but maybe
Favorite's already had that too, haven't they?
True.
I do have an idea, but
Okay,
I'll
I wanna
finish.
Oh, I want to hear Emma's idea then.
Let Emma go. I am going to take a crack at this. So I'm just staking my flag,
Yeah.
and I do want to.
Okay, so
I'm
we're
just
gonna go
going to-
Emma and then
yeah.
Liana.
So, like, I don't know, Jackie, you're saying like people are going to want to see certain things, and I'm just going to repeat myself. Like, then just go to the old stuff because clearly you're not looking for new stuff. I don't care about the people who want to see the same thing again.
Solidarity
I know,
there.
as a company, there are some considerations, but I would say if anyone at WotC cares to listen to this, you got to be willing to give up absolutely everything about Kara-Tur in order to make something worth selling. One, like, whole new map. And my idea would be, I don't like the idea of the existing stuff being just in the past and now things have changed over time, because like what existed in the past is still horrible,
Still bad. That's true.
full of
And
stereotypes.
and we're tied to that. Yeah.
Yeah, and so the fact that it's kind of like stereotypes and also written for Elminster, like, let's leave Elminster out of this, poor guy, but whatever. Just make it a colonialism. Like, this was someone's poor take, traveling around the area, trying to make it like a travel log.
So in the meta,
It's
it's actually
It's
just
so
a terrible book.
And so,
Yeah, no,
like,
it's like this
Kara-Tur-
dragons eat, pray, love. Like, we don't need it.
Yeah, and like, you could even say just like Kara-Tur isn't what people of the region call it, which is probably accurate. Like, just make it what it is. It's like some bad outsider take on a region that's supposed to be Asian inspired, and that's better than blowing it up, because like, maybe don't blow up Asia. There's there doesn't have to be some big technological boom and now suddenly it's a different place altogether. No, because it's still built on a base of stereotypes and nonsense. And it was already written into the book that this was an account written for someone else to try and understand this place. Well, guess what? They got it wrong, or they understood it through a frame that doesn't work. And now here's
the real story.
Stuff about
Dun, dun.
this region. And like, we could do that in city installments, or, you know, I don't think it's a good idea to put out one big book that rewrites it all, because one, no one's going to buy that. It's too much book, and it's probably more info than they'll ever want. Yeah, it could go on D&D Beyond or something like that and be usable, but I think multiple books would probably be better, because most people are more drawn toward particular parts of Asia in general. Not collectively, but individually. Someone's more interested in, say, Korean-based stuff, or a lot of people are interested in Japanese-based stuff. Like, it gives them options to pick what they want, but it also gives the authors of those books, and I'd say multiple authors, even if it's a smaller book, get more people in on each one, that it becomes like, yeah, a dense but rich subsection written from the perspective of the people who are in that place. So it's no longer some random ass dragon flying around in his castle writing to Elminster about the people that he thinks he knows, even though he clearly, I'm saying there was a clear disdain for some of the people that were in Kara-Tur. It wasn't objective. There was inter-Asian racism going on there, that some were better than others. And that's not a good way to go. Don't do that. No.
I
no,
just
thank you.
had a thought that the dragon in the castle is essentially the perspective of a white van lifer influencer. That's essentially what that is.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
God.
No, this is 100%.
Absolutely.
This
100%
dragon is essentially the kind of would go to Burning Man. This
Yeah.
This dragon would like poof his palace into Burning Man next to the Winklevoss twins.
Would go
Like, it might not
to
even
Burning
be
Man,
Asian
but would
dragon.
also complain the entire time.
Oh,
Yeah.
100%.
Absolutely, 100%.
This food is
Yeah,
too
but yeah,
spicy.
a
This
dragon in a
kanji doesn't
castle.
match my palate. Sorry, I brought that up.
Why are these dumplings so small?
Yeah.
But yeah,
Well, let's
I
put
think
fruit in it.
I just brought back that memory of that white woman who made congee palatable to Western taste with pineapple and goat and berries.
Let's not forget. Let's not forget about the really
Mahjong.
expensive mahjong tile.
Yeah.
Oh, Liana, do you remember that one chef who was like, "This is how you eat pho"?
Oh, wait.
properly.
Oh, my
you
God.
don't put hoisin
Oh.
sauce and sriracha in it. That's not
Oh,
how
God.
you do it.
Or
Like
that-
one out. Yeah.
It hurts
Yeah.
me so much.
But Liana, you had a thing. Unless Emma, you had other stuff you wanted to say, because you're absolutely right. Like doing it in installments and compartmentalizing the work and really focusing on quality over sheer quantity in a single volume is kind of the strategy you were saying.
And I do think you can't escape the old Kara-Tur. So like maybe let's just write it in a way that makes the old Kara-Tur nonsense instead of something that everyone is beholden to. And so people can
kind of
still go
was
back to
nonsense
it.
already. So like,
Yeah.
I
And
love the
people can
idea
still
of
go
like
back to it, but
This is the real
it's not the real,
Kara-Tur.
it's not the real
I-
Kara-Tur.
I love the idea of like having a character cameo or of like someone writing about this dragon being like, yeah, this dragon just keeps popping up and like
Yeah.
ordering the worst foods and is just a terrible person. And then they just sort of like bamf out of here.
Every book has some account of this dragon.
Yeah, you
Yes.
basically just
Yes,
turn
every city.
you just turn the content of the original character into satire, like in world satire.
Yeah.
And then that's
Yeah.
it.
yeah.
Yeah.
it's certainly bad enough that it would come off a bit better if it were. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would
is
be
it my
my
turn? Do I
way
get
to
to give my pitch?
Yes, I
Yeah,
want to
go,
hear
go,
your
go.
pitch.
Yes,
Go,
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 go.
go.
Remember, I'm a businesswoman and a project manager. All right, so
Love it.
Emma's stance is where I was coming down to. Kara-Tur is the name given to the region by the people who inhabit the Sword Coast. That is not the actual name of the region.
Yes.
Here's where I would start. I would get this team of amazing Asian writers, and I would sit everyone down and say, we are going to make a Sword Coast for this new setting. So what we're going to do first is we're going to, as a collective group of diverse Asians, we are going to talk about cultural through lines in our storytelling and in our mythology and come up with a way to apply this to the existent Faerun setting. We are not setting out to replicate the feel of China or Japan or the Philippines. We are going to come together, establish commonalities between our cultures, which do exist. We have traded and fought and shared food and all kinds of things for centuries. So we are going to establish these through lines through our mythology, through our stories, through our cultures. And we are going to create something that is a bit of everyone, but not distinctly anybody. We are going to create a fantasy setting. In this, we will create this region, this Sword Coast-esque region with which we can focus. And then as we build it, we are going to hire novelists to start making marquee characters, much like you would see in Elminster or Drizzt and we're going to start doing novelizations to get people interested in the setting, much as TSR and Wizards did in the old days with Dragonlance, with Forgotten Realms. We are going to create an interesting region. We are going to have interesting stories set in it, and we are going to make it regionally distinct and interesting in a way that a fantasy that draws upon Asian mythology could be without having all this messy one-for-one baggage that Kara-Tur holds.
Yeah.
So that is my pitch.
If by
There's
head,
so many.
in my head, it would
sorry.
be called Coast to Coast. Sorry. When I went like this, I was like,
Space
oh.
Ghost? Space Ghost, Ghost, Ghost.
No. Yeah, Coast to Coast.
Asian Space Ghost.
Coast to Coast.
No.
No, but Liana, I really like that idea of like, there is this shared cultural understanding of these deities that look down upon this land, and people have different names. It actually makes me, I can't talk about this yet, but I can speak vaguely of it. I can't wait to talk about this because I only have praise for this project. I worked on a project and they had all of this lore and they asked me to write an Asian thing for it. And I was like, cool, I'll do this Asian theme thing. It's not fantasy, it's horror, it's set in North America. And when I was writing, they basically went and said, okay, but what would because it's about Chinese people, what would the Chinese people call this? I don't want to use the lore names that I came up with. What would the Chinese people call this? What would be their interpretations of this lore? Give me alternative names to everything as it would make sense to the Asian characters here. And then can you also give me pronunciation keys? And I said, what? And I had never been asked that before. And what you just said, Liana, was that experience. Was like, hey, we have this mythology. How would these people, how would this group of people interpret it? And I've never been asked that before. And I was actually really taken aback. And I was like, what's the catch? Is there a trap? And they said, and they were like, this is what we want because we want it to be told from their perspective. And the fact that I was blown away from that in 2022 is just, it's so sad for the tabletop gaming industry, right? Because all we're trying to say here is if you're going, what Emma and Liana, what you both have just said is, if you're going to revive Kara-Tur or a canonical 5e Asian setting, it should be written from their perspective. And in order to do it, you would need a diverse Asian team if you're going to make it sort of this. I love the wording that you said. I wrote it down. A bit of everyone, but not distinctly anybody. Because you then avoid having samurai and Shaolin monks. You kind of have this warrior class, right? And I think that's really interesting what both of you said.
Here's the thing, too. There's been a samurai class in, like, what, every edition?
And they've all sucked.
They all suck.
Oh, God.
And they're all unnecessary because the fighter is right there.
The monk. Let's talk about the monk and the fight. I mean, we did a whole episode on that.
Oh, yeah.
Fewer classes.
I actually made, when I was in the 3.5 era, I made an unarmed fighter type that I wanted to be very flavor neutral. So basically what I focused it on was like getting enormous. The fantasy concept I had in my mind was a dude or a lady stepping out and a dragon charging them and then grabbing the dragon by the horns with their bare hands and flipping them over. And I just made this kind of like, you can go brawler, you can do unarmed combat if you want, or you could do more of an armored fighter type. The whole concept is just you are someone who can flip things on their back that are multiple times your size. And that could be whatever you want. You don't need a cultural class.
And
which fourth edition was actually trying to do. They made the monk psionic because they talked about how they were contemplating having a key power source, but they didn't feel right because the key power source as they envisioned it was just all of the Asian classes. Mm-hmm. So they made an unarmed fighting type character class that was psionic because it had this like idea of like this mental physical harmony, and that was the basis of it. So it still had those influences of the monk as D&D recognizes it, but it was kind of its own thing.
Here's the thing that bothers me. In D&D, or in conversations about TTRPGs and stuff like that, or even honestly, just in general pop culture, martial artist just means Asian. And that blows my mind because it's not the case. There are literally people like historical European martial arts. Martial artist could literally be it. You don't have to call it a fighter, just call it a martial artist.
Capoeira is right there. Capoeira is like right there.
So it's like martial arts are just, hey, weapons, hand to hand. And then you could literally, I'm just going to go hand to hand and I'm going to suplex the dragon. No, I'm going to go more the spiritual route, right? And that's the subclass where you cultivate like chi. Or you know what? I'm just going to go all weapons. I'm going to go like the Hema sort of style. I'm just going to go with like heavy weapons and armor. Or I'm going to go into this sort of duelist and I'm going to like fight with like a rapier and stuff like that. And that could all just be the various directions in which a martial artist can progress. There's my pitch.
And I think that's what is so nice about the idea of having installations, because we can flesh that out, right?
Yes.
Like not every region that we focus on. And honestly, like maybe it's not necessarily even a city. Maybe it's just like a really cool place.
That's why in my pitch it was like, we're going to make kind of a new Sword Coast. We're going to make a region that is a fantasy kingdom, empire, whatever, but it's a fantasy realization that is more informed by Asian outlooks and stories than it is by European ones. But it's still its own thing that exists in the Forgotten Realms. You're still going to get nailed to the wall of the faithless if you're an atheist. Do they still do that? Forgotten Realms really fucking sucks.
I'm not super into the lore, to be honest, for obvious reasons.
If you want the answer, Liana, it's still in the lore technically.
Awesome, great.
But the idea is like we can branch this out, right? Like if we create this, we can create regions where the development of these specific styles, these specific like modes of combat naturally evolve because of the place where these people live. I think that just makes a lot of sense. Like that's what I like about this. I like the idea of maybe combining the two and just sort of like having, okay, we have this overarching umbrella of like, we create this new kingdom, but we're going to create sort of these installments of like focusing on these areas. And as we do so, like even how they like hang out with each other, you know, what are the tensions between these places? Are there even tensions?
Are there factions? What are the factions like? What are their
factions,
political systems?
What are the politics?
The government.
Leona can come in and write out a whole thing about like trade routes, because commerce and how that factors into everything.
It's important. That's what unites these places more often than not. It's war or commerce or migration.
And so and so like that's okay. So hi Watsy, it's us. Good to see y'all.
It's like, hello, God,
this is our pitch. and honestly, like I really, you know, I hope that one day, if we do get this opportunity, that's the direction we go into, because I feel like that's going to make sense. But again, like that touches back upon what Daniel, you were saying about the fact that we need to have people who have lived experience with this leading and you know, it's difficult to feel liberated and free enough to be able to push something forward when you're dealing in a sandbox that's actively constructed for someone else and by other people.
And I will add,
and also falling apart.
And I'll add a really good example of the fact that we know Wizards already knows how to do this, because they made the global series for Magic the Gathering, and the global series, the dual decks are
that didn't.
But here's the thing: it's better than anything.
It
didn't do well. It didn't sell well. It didn't market it well. But from like the perspective of working as a team, having a team in China and having a Western team working together and collaborating, we know that they could actually do that. The selling part is completely different.
Possible.
But we know that they can do it, right? And that brings up a whole other thing that we talk about here, right? If you're going to make, let's just say we're not going to go this sort of interestingly sort of blended route, and we're going to try to make an actual analog, then you have to think about, okay, well, then you have folks who are of the diaspora working on something, and then you would also need to have folks in Asia working on this, right? So that's another hurdle that you'd have to go over, right? So I think this sort of like Asian inspired but not explicitly this Asian culture is the route to go, because it will perpetuate the least amount of harm, and it honestly gives you a more ambiguous foundation that you can build something positive out of. Because there won't be those expectations.
And clearly that's the...
Well,
Ed Greenwood would sign off on it, and clearly that's what really matters.
And he has a stamp.
Oh, yes, 100%. He has a stamp.
Ed has his own stamp.
Is it a stamp or is it like the old timey seal things?
Oh yeah, for
Oh,
sure.
like a chop.
Like a wax
Definitely
seal.
the
A wax seal.
Oh, like
The
wax seal? Okay.
Yeah.
I should make
Yeah.
stickers that's like Daniel Kwan, bleh, and I just put it on like all these other things.
It just literally says bleh.
It's bleh. I don't like.
But you can put it on stickers and you can just like plop it on books.
Yeah, to just walk around a con and just be like, stick it down on a book.
People are like, what?
Why would you say?
Oh, what? Ew. No, yours would say this game is bullshit. That's
This
what
is
you,
bullshit.
this is
Yeah,
bullshit.
that's very
what
true.
that's what yours would say.
That is definitely Emma's.
Yeah.
Well, mine's just like racism tiramisu.
Oh my god. Oh god.
Oh my goodness.
But I think the overall consensus is that remaking Kara-Tur as is extremely complex, and there is a high chance of perpetuating harm if they approach it the same way they've been approaching other products like this. At the same time, like Liana, you've said, the return of Kara-Tur is inevitable because it is anchored to the brand that is everyone's perception of the world of 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. Because of, the inclusion of even nods to it in, was it Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide? That's that book that they outsourced, right? Is that the one? They outsourced an entire Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide book. I'm pretty sure it's that one. They talked about Kara-Tur, they talked about Al-Qadim, but then they also have mentions of Kara-Tur in the Dungeon Master's Guide, the Player's Handbook, and because of awful people like Daniel Kwan in Candlekeep Mysteries. So
I'm so sorry, Daniel.
No, but it's true.
You're gonna be self-flagellating like this for
No,
months.
but here's the thing.
and
It's
all my fault.
Here's the thing. I already ruined D&D by not tracking HP. So
Yeah, that's
what
true.
can I say? But the thing is, like, there are so many challenges to making Kara-Tur that ultimately creating something brand new is going to make a much better product, and you're going to avoid a lot of the problems that you had with all of the other Asian-themed official mainline D&D products. So that's kind of what I've seen this conversation kind of steer towards. Would you folks agree with that?
Yeah.
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 I'd say
I
that.
agree with
Absolutely.
that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Now, that said, we have actually, this has been the fastest a podcast episode has gone by in my mind. It's already,
It did go by very quickly.
it went by really fast because
It did.
I think our rage and frustration has kind of, and then excitement about like a city or a coastline really like directed the conversation and steered it in a way that felt natural. Now, that said,
Are you just congratulating yourself on the structure of this podcast?
no, I'm talking about everyone. I'm talking about all of us. I'm talking about all of us. Because
He's
I
congratulating
I
all
feel
of
like
us.
he's putting,
I'm congratulating
he's
all
putting
of
himself
us.
up on. He's like putting himself on pedestals, and Emma as you're being lifted. She's like, are we?
Excuse
What
me?
was happening?
Why are you praising me? No, the
No,
point
it
being
did
is like,
go well.
when we are excited about something, when we're like, oh, this is really cool, when we're sharing ideas, the audience can really tell, right? The audience can tell that, hey, this is something that I would want to do. This is a game system that I would want to play. Go buy Valor. This is an entire supplement range for 5th edition D&D that I might want to use. Go buy Unbreakable. Or this is like a creator I want to follow. Follow Michelle for whenever Michelle publishes that stuff that Michelle's working on.
I'm
Same with actually
I'm
Emma.
working on it.
Yeah, I'm working on stuff too.
However,
Look at us
stop buying Michelle's possum pottery so I can actually get my hands on one.
Yo,
This is a problem, and I need y'all to stop because I haven't gotten one yet.
stop buying
pause.
Michelle's stuff until Liana can buy something, and then just buy everything out again.
Then you can buy stuff again. Just get.
Just wait.
I also think
I am considering putting my possum chopsticks rest up for sale because I'm painting them right now, and I'm like, these are
when's
really
the drop
cause someone a
happening?
lot of
When's the drop
joy.
happening?
Oh boy.
Honestly,
I
I
just
think
need this. I just need the Scream at Own Ass mug. Like, we must have
So
it,
good.
it's really good.
and I haven't been able to get it yet, and I'm very offended by this fact.
This is just like
It's not your fault. It's all of you.
this is the
Keep buying out the
episode.
store.
This is Liana just like politely calling us out on things. Michelle, you are too good at your craft. You keep selling up before I
How
can buy
dare
it.
you?
How
How
dare
dare
you? How dare you have demand for your wares when I demand it more? Yeah. Honestly, I think she should do like, Michelle's next ceramic drop. Put like a countdown on a website. Treat it like one of those like clothing line drops. Be like, oh, the next drop's coming out.
Oh my
Yeah.
god.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would require me to be like a real influencer. And I've only ever received one influencer bag. No, one influencer drop from Watsy. So I just don't know if I
You're a
really
real
qualify.
influencer. You're a real influencer.
You're a real influencer. You only need
I've
the one.
received none, so you're yeah.
You only need the one.
You have clearly influenced Liana into really wanting your possum pottery. So you're clearly an influencer.
Exactly.
But that said, folks on the podcast, I have to personally admit something. You can't tell, I'm kind of stalling to do the whole patron thing because I don't really do it with Marla. I'm kind of stalling. It's kind of uncomfortable for me because, the real executive producer of Agents Represent is now in like whatever they call kitty heaven in Kara-Tur.
Oh,
God, I don't want to
Do we
think
have
about
to?
that.
Do we?
No, I don't want to
Marla
think about
deserves
that.
better.
It doesn't really.
Mar-
You don't
Marla-
really want it there.
I feel like
deserves better.
Marla is just like scooting around that dragon. One thing that we always talked about is like,
Pal is just doing like.
well, the thing is that like Marla had a habit because she was so big, right? Of like
Yeah, bump
scooting after she pooped. But when Marla scooted, she made like direct eye contact with you while she scooted. And Sarah, my partner, and I had this like long running joke. So that Marla was, like in Full Metal Alchemist, the big overarching plot was they were going to sacrifice everyone in this big transmutation circle. We said that, Marla is making a transcutation circle, and she's just making her alchemical lines with her butt. And I like to think that
just making
Marla...
those 8 concentric rings.
8 concentric rings. She's scooting those 8 concentric
There you
rings
go.
to
You gotta pick her
destroy
up
this
before she
dragon.
finishes the last one.
She's putting it around the dragon. And yeah, so that's what Marla's doing. She's protecting us with her cat alchemy. But yeah, I miss my kitty. But she lived a good life. And I am comforted in all of the videos that I have of Marla on this podcast. I'm so happy, and you know what? I'm going to do it now. I am so happy that our patrons were able to meet Marla remotely. I'm happy that our patrons were able to hear Marla squeak because Marla never learned to meow. And we had this revelation the other day that Marla never learned to meow because, when cats meow, they actually just meow for humans. Marla never saw us as human. Marla saw us as cats. So that's why Marla squeaked at us. Marla misses all of you, but Marla is comfortable. Marla is happy. Marla has no pain, and Marla has unlimited wet food wherever she is. She is watching over us. She's watching over the podcast, and Marla is making sure that everyone here is safe, and she really wants to thank all of our amazing patrons, especially the most honorable ones, because Marla is the best. So shout out to all of our amazing patrons for that. Shout out to Metalweave Games. Congratulations on, I believe, the IGDN award for Kiana and Jason's Cyberpunk city setting. It can be done. Cyberpunk can be made without being deeply Orientalist. Shout out to, Valorous Games. Always plug Valorous Games whenever I can. Bleach is coming back. The Bleach anime is coming back. And if you want to do that sort of stuff, check out Valor.
Why you gotta hurt me like this?
Look. I know your brand. And check out Valorous Games, right? Check out, honestly, Valor is great. And I know you've got an ongoing Valor stream that happens too, right? It's pretty
Yes, we are Valor Live The Woven, which Michelle is part of, and then Steve, who's in the chat, who are actually playing culturally Vietnamese fantasy Vietnamese characters, which is a lot of fun.
We're siblings.
Yeah, I love the art. I honestly love the art.
You know that pitch I gave about how to build a world? Like, I'm kind of working on putting that team together for my own setting, which is why I have this, because I'm drawing inspiration culturally from like Italian, Spanish, like Celtic, Scottish, Irish, Vietnamese, Korean, and then kind of West African Mali Empire. And I'm trying to put together a big group to like have us all sit down and be like, all right, let's take cool stuff from our culture and mix it up, but do cool stuff with that. Like I enjoy doing this. Like, I enjoy doing these cultural exchange things. And like, what would happen if our cultures met up and formed a giant defensive empire together, and how would things change? Like,
I feel like that's a great episode
kind of
of the
stuff.
Asians Represent podcast. Honestly,
I actually find all my writers first.
I also just want to, of course, listen to another episode on like that Vietnamese episode Steve did, which is so good. I just want another one of those. And we'll do it. We've got so many ideas. We've got a lot of like tough episodes to do, and by tough I mean meaningful, because those conversations are hard to have. And so we have a couple of other patrons. Dungeon Glitch slash Matt. I always shout out Matt for the amazing Twitter threads and just being awesome out there. Bob C, and of course the most honorable ×2 Epic Impulse. Y'all rock. Marla is just so deeply appreciative of all of our patrons, and just like everybody, Marla was just so full of love. £1 for every year. Marla was great. I'm gonna miss Marla, and I hope
all miss Marla.
I hope all of you who watched Asians Represent when Marla was on can remember her high-pitched squeaks. And if you really want to see Marla, there is a video on our YouTube channel where I unboxed the Neon Dynasty package that WotC gave me with Marla, and it was great. And from like a D&D perspective, I do have to thank WotC. I keep every single box that WotC has sent me, because they're actually quite cool. And one year, I think at Christmas last year, they sent out a really cool box, and it kind of had a lid that opened up like this. And on the inside was this cute little owl bear, and it said "open for cold resistance" all over the inside. And sorry, I'm getting emotional. And Sarah and I buried Marla in that box because she was like our little owl bear, and on the inside it said "open for cold resistance." And so we buried Marla in that box in my parents' backyard, because that D&D box will keep Marla warm forever, because it gives her cold resistance. And so we buried her in that. And I don't know where I was going with that. But yeah, so like, I know we shit on Kara-Tur a lot, but there are folks at WotC who are really great. And they often reach out to me behind the scenes if I talk about like going through rough stuff. And they always privately will ask if I'm doing okay. So there are good people at WotC. We talk about the bad things in some of their products, but there are lots of really good people behind the scenes. And so I am super grateful that I got that package to begin with, because it was the perfect thing to sort of rest Marla in, because she was our little owl bear. But that said, I want to thank Michelle, Liana, Jackie, Emma for joining me for this Kara-Tur retrospective, but also us actually kind of coming up with something really cool.
Looking forward, right?
Yeah, we're looking forward.
Looking forward.
Yeah.
So,
but also stop asking if we're going to keep reading more of it.
So stop asking that.
Yeah, please.
Please stop asking that.
Yeah, please stop asking that.
We're not going to, and I'm gonna cut this episode. So no, go ahead. Sorry.
We just need like one moment where we're all like, no, like just together, just no.
What I was gonna say is, feeding into the point, as you've said, the Wizards of the Coast people, lovely people, very much well-meaning. I imagine the people who wrote Kara-Tur were well-meaning as well. It unfortunately sometimes even good intentions will inflict harm. That said, though, Kara-Tur inflicts a lot of harm and is also very bad.
So
Do not
think,
remake.
so do not remake.
Would not recommend.
There we go. But I will cut this
Unsubscribe.
episode up into like little clips so that if folks ever ask me about this, there we go. This is the question in the chat: will it happen before or after 6th edition? The answer should be it shouldn't happen at all. And we'll have all sorts of clips for it. That said, I'm super excited because the new platform that we're using will allow us to make easier to edit clips so we can do YouTube Shorts. So I'm really hyped about that because our YouTube Shorts are currently just me talking about how much I love Kaiju number 8 and how Kaiju number 8 is getting an anime adaptation. I'm super hyped about it.
Ooh.
And
Ooh.
yeah, there's some like really interesting stuff out there. Like I talked about my love of Free Ren, Beyond Journey's End. I actually on my desk, and I'll close with this because it's completely unrelated. But I have an interesting book. It's actually and content warning if you look up this stuff. But it's Berserk. And
yeah.
they actually made an official guidebook for Berserk, and it has like a world history and stuff. It's actually really interesting. I've never seen anything like this for a manga. But it's got like, this is the history of the Midland, and stuff like that. So
Berserk was so influential in creating
influential
anime conception of fantasy. It's
Yeah.
incredibly tragic that we lost the author.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is.
It hurts the talent and the legacy that was lost with that.
Yep.
Yeah. And honestly, Berserk is incredible. If you folks want dark fantasy, check out Berserk. It's great. The point I'm trying to make is that you don't need Kara-Tur to tell interesting stories. There are lots of sources of inspiration out for you. If you like Dark Souls, because I see in our chat somebody mentioned Dark Souls, Berserk is just Dark Souls the manga. It's really good. Super violent. Very gritty, and there are a lot of really dark themes in it. But that said, if there is one takeaway, if you're like, man, I really want Kara-Tur, go out and look and see what else is available. Because if you want a setting, it doesn't have to be a D&D product. It could be the Unbreakable stuff that isn't D&D. It could be the Unbreakable stuff that is D&D. It could be, hey, I want combat that feels more like anime. It could be Valor. If there's stuff that isn't published yet by Michelle or Emma, you'll eventually find it if they publish it. My recommendation, though, is Gubat Banwa. It is a tactical RPG with a world inspired by pre-colonial Philippines. Check it out.
Yeah, it's really cool.
It's really cool.
Sina Una.
And Sina Una.
Sina Una.
Yeah, that's another. I can't believe
Their
we didn't talk about
Kickstarter.
Sina. They have a new
Their
Kickstarter.
Kickstarter's live.
So check that out. But that said, folks, thank you for joining us for our first episode without Marla. But I will say that I'm happy that it was this episode, and I think that I'm going to say the H word, we honored Marla with a really good episode. And we were together, we were positive, and yeah, that's
I
it.
drew a little thing.
Oh, you drew a thing?
Off of...
Okay. Oh my god, is she scooting?
Scoot.
She's scooting?
She's scooting.
Yes.
Can you scan
She's
that
doing
and
a scoot.
can you send that to me? I'm gonna send all of you folks stuff after.
I was gonna do like
Transcutation.
Transcutation.
I was gonna do like a panel comic where it's like she's doing this, and the next panel is just like an overhead of her just scooting.
The circle.
Honestly, if you folks, anybody wants to do art of Marla, send it my way. I would really appreciate it. But that said, you folks are awesome. Not only my amazing guests, but also anyone who is watching, listening, and learning with us. We'll see you next time on a very different episode topic. We're going to be talking about Asian cinema and blaxploitation. It's going to be awesome. I can't wait.
It's really good.
We'll see you all on looking at my schedule, on the 19th of August. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.